In the quiet, suburban town of Stone Ridge, the smell of fresh coffee lingered in the air as the morning sun barely pierced through the thick window curtains of the Brooks family home. The house, a modest but well-kept structure nestled on the outskirts of the city, had witnessed years of arguments, moments of laughter, and the ebb and flow of a family's fragile yet enduring bond. But today, there was a strange weight in the air, something almost suffocating about the way the morning sunlight hit the hardwood floors. Jasmine Brooks sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea, eyes fixed on the clock. The sound of footsteps came from the hallway, followed by a door creaking open. She didn't need to turn around to know it was her husband, David. She hadn't heard him come in last night, just as she hadn't heard him return the night before. His silence spoke volumes. "Morning." David's voice was low, tinged with something unfamiliar. It was the kind of greeting you give when you've already mentally checked out. Jasmine didn't look up. "Morning. How'd it go last night?" she asked, trying to sound casual, but there was a slight tremor in her voice. David paused before answering. "We're going to need to talk later." Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. The tone, the hesitation, it was all wrong. It was as if David had been carrying some kind of secret with him for days, maybe even weeks. She could feel the weight of it press down on her chest, making it harder to breathe. And still, she said nothing, waiting for him to elaborate. Instead, David walked past her, heading toward the fridge, opening it, and pulling out a bottled water. He didn't sit. He didn't offer anything else. He just took the bottle, twisted off the cap, and drank in silence. The tension thickened in the room. Jasmine stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "David, what is going on? You've been different lately. You've barely spoken to me, and every time I ask about it, you shut me out. What are you hiding?" David froze, the water bottle still at his lips. His eyes flickered toward her, but there was nothing there. No recognition of the woman he once claimed to love. Nothing that looked like the man she'd married. Only the hollow eyes of a stranger. "Jazz," he began, the word coming out soft, almost apologetic, but it felt empty. "I'm sorry, okay? But I need you to understand something." The words hung in the air, as if they were building toward some kind of revelation that neither of them were ready for. Jasmine's pulse quickened, her stomach tightening into a knot of dread. "You need to understand what?" she asked, her voice quivering now. She could feel it. Something was coming. Something was about to break. She could sense the change in the air, as if the world itself were holding its breath. David set the water bottle down and turned to face her fully, his jaw tight, as though he'd been rehearsing this moment in his head. "I'm filing for divorce," he said bluntly, his words cutting through the room like a blade. "I'm done. I want full custody of the kids." Jasmine's world seemed to slow down, the words sinking into her skin like ice. Divorce? Full custody? It didn't make sense. It couldn't. Not after everything they'd been through. Not after raising 2 kids together, building this life, this home. But it wasn't just the divorce that hit her like a freight train. It was the calm way he said it, as if this was just another mundane decision he'd made, like picking up groceries or choosing a restaurant. There was no emotion behind it, just cold, methodical detachment. Jasmine stood frozen, her mind racing, struggling to process what she'd just heard. "David, what are you talking about? You don't want this. You can't." David looked at her, the flicker of something in his eyes, but it was gone before she could decipher it. "I don't want the life we built, Jazz. I don't want you anymore. And I don't want the kids being raised in this house." A sharp pain shot through Jasmine's chest, a feeling she couldn't quite name. She had given everything to this family, to him, to their children. She had sacrificed parts of herself, abandoned dreams, put aside her own needs. And now, just like that, it was all being ripped away. But you can't just take them," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "There are children. We built a life together. You can't just—" "I can," he interrupted, his voice growing louder, more certain. "I already filed the documents." Jasmine's knees buckled, and she collapsed into the nearest chair, her hands trembling. "Documents?" she whispered. "What documents?" David sighed, a sound of exhaustion, of someone who had already checked out long before the conversation began. I filed the papers, Jazz. The ones that say you voluntarily signed over custody. They're in the court system now. Jasmine's head spun, her breath shallow. No, she gasped. I didn't. I didn't sign anything. You did. He cut in, almost too calmly. You signed it over to Simone. Simone. The name hit Jasmine like a slap in the face. Simone Carter. The woman who had spent more time with David in the past 6 months than she had. The woman who smiled in her face, told her everything was fine, all while sinking her claws deeper into David's life. The same woman who had slowly but surely taken over their world. Jasmine's vision blurred with tears. You're lying, she choked out. You're lying. I didn't sign anything. David's silence was her answer. Jasmine rose shakily from the chair, her body trembling with disbelief, fury, and a rising sense of helplessness. I didn't sign it, she repeated, more firmly this time. You can't just take them from me. I won't let you. David didn't reply. Instead, he just turned his back to her, heading toward the door, the sound of his footsteps echoing in the now empty space between them. I'll be back later, he said coldly, his tone like ice. Jasmine watched him leave, her body frozen in place. Every fiber of her being screamed for her to fight back, to scream, to break something, anything. But instead, she stood there, paralyzed by the crushing weight of the betrayal, her mind racing as she struggled to understand how this all had happened. Simone had taken everything, and David had handed it to her without a second thought. But what David didn't know was that Jasmine wasn't just some woman he could discard, wasn't just another part of his life he could move on from. She had something he didn't, a truth he couldn't even begin to comprehend, and she was about to make him regret ever underestimating her. The day dragged on in a haze, each minute stretching longer than the last. Jasmine sat in the quiet of their home, the sounds of the city beyond the walls growing muffled, distant. Her thoughts raced, each one colliding with the next, but none of them offered any real clarity. David's words kept replaying in her head. I filed the documents. You signed it over to Simone. The thought that she had unknowingly relinquished control over her own children gnawed at her insides. She picked up her phone, staring at it as if it could somehow give her the answers she so desperately needed. Her hands were still shaking, but she managed to dial a number she knew by heart. Hey, it's me, Jasmine said, her voice strained. I need your help. On the other end of the line, there was a brief pause before a familiar voice responded. Jazz? What's going on? You sound off. I don't know who else to call. I need to get the truth, and I don't know how to start, she confessed, the weight of it all settling heavier on her shoulders. Her brother, Marcus, had always been there for her, a solid rock in a world that had often felt uncertain. They shared everything growing up, secrets, dreams, frustrations, and now, in the midst of the storm she found herself in, he was the only person who could truly understand. You've got to start at the beginning, Jasmine. What happened? What did he say exactly? Jasmine let out a long, shaky breath, her mind dragging her back to the moment David had dropped the bomb. He filed for divorce. He said he wants full custody of the kids. And then, he said I signed the papers, that I gave up my parental rights. To Simone. She could barely say Simone's name without the rage bubbling up from deep inside her. She had trusted that woman, believed her lies, and now, here she was, being painted as the villain in her own story. There was a long silence before Marcus spoke again. What do you mean you signed it? Jazz, you're telling me David says you signed it, but you don't remember? I don't remember signing anything, she said, her voice growing more firm with each word. I would never give up my kids, Marcus. Never. And if I did sign something, it was forged. I'm sure of it. Jazz, we're going to figure this out. I'll help you get the proof you need. We're not letting him get away with this, Marcus said, his tone full of determination. She nodded to herself, even though he couldn't see it. I need to get to the bottom of this. There's no way I'm letting Simone raise my children. I'm their mother. I'm the one who birthed them. I'm the one who cared for them. Not her. Marcus sighed. I'm on it, sis. We'll go to the court records, see if anything looks off. We'll find out where the forgery happened, and we'll get you the evidence to bring it all down." "Thank you, Marcus," Jasmine whispered, feeling a bit lighter knowing she wasn't alone in this fight. "I won't give up my children without a fight." "He doesn't know what he's just set in motion." "I know you won't," Marcus replied, a hint of pride in his voice. "I'll handle the legal stuff, but you've got something he doesn't: your strength. And that's what will win in the end." Jasmine spent the rest of the day in a blur of action. She gathered every document she could find: photos, receipts, old text messages, anything that could serve as evidence of her life with the children, of the love she had poured into raising them. At the same time, her mind couldn't shake the image of David and Simone, sitting together as if they had taken over her life. It made her blood boil, but she forced herself to push it down. There was no time for anger now, only focus. That night, as the hours ticked on and the city outside her window grew quieter, Jasmine couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw David's face, the coldness in his eyes as he told her it was over. How could he be so sure? What made him think he could destroy everything they built so easily? Then, she thought of the envelope Miss Geneva had left her all those years ago, the one that she had kept safe for so long. That envelope wasn't just a memento of her grandmother. It was her lifeline. Jasmine didn't know when the time would come to open it, but she knew it was soon. And when it did, the truth would set her free. As the first light of dawn broke through her bedroom window, Jasmine got out of bed. Her heart was heavy, but there was also a sense of clarity, a sense of purpose. She wasn't just a woman whose husband had turned against her. She was a mother and a daughter, and she had a legacy that could not be erased. She grabbed her purse, slipping the yellowed envelope into it carefully, and then she made a decision. She would go to court the next day, and she would fight. But she wasn't going alone. There was a name she needed to call, a name that would ensure her victory. Jasmine arrived at the courthouse the following morning, the weight of the world still pressing heavily on her chest. She had spent the better part of the night gathering her thoughts, going over every detail in her mind. But now, standing before the imposing doors of the family court, her pulse quickened. The air around her felt thick with anticipation, and though she had known this moment would come, she wasn't entirely prepared for the cold reality of it all. Inside, the courthouse buzzed with the usual noise: lawyers speaking in hushed tones, families sitting nervously, and clerks behind counters flipping through papers. But none of it mattered to Jasmine. Her focus was singular. Today, she would reclaim what was hers. She sat in the back of the courtroom, the manila folder clutched tightly in her hands. Her eyes darted between the opposing counsel, David, and Simone. Simone was sitting next to David, her manicured nails tapping rhythmically against the table. She had that same calm, almost smug expression she wore every time she showed up, pretending to be the benevolent stepmother. Jasmine clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. The nerve of this woman. To think she could replace her as a mother. The case was called. David, with his perfectly tailored suit and emotionless expression, stood up with the same cold composure. Simone followed suit, her heels clicking on the courtroom floor as she walked towards the stand. Jasmine's stomach churned, but she remained calm. She knew what was at stake. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with short gray hair and a pair of reading glasses perched on the end of her nose, motioned for them to begin. "Mr. Brooks," the judge addressed David, "please present your case." David rose slowly, adjusting his tie. "Your Honor," he began, his voice steady and rehearsed. "I am seeking full custody of our children, Caleb and Chloe Brooks. My wife, Mrs. Jasmine Brooks, has voluntarily signed over her parental rights to Miss Simone Carter, who has been the primary caregiver for the children for the past 6 months. She is the one who has been present in their lives, attending doctor appointments, staying up late with them, and taking care of their daily needs. My client and I believe that Simone is the best candidate to raise these children moving forward." Jasmine felt the blood drain from her face as she sat there, listening to David's words. How dare he? He was sitting there, pretending to be the devoted father, when he had abandoned her, abandoned their children for his selfish desires. Her mind swirled, but she kept her composure, her fingers gripping the folder even tighter. Simone's lawyer, a sharp-suited man with a perfectly styled haircut, stood up next. He presented the so-called voluntary surrender documents as if they were legitimate, but Jasmine could feel her anger bubbling beneath the surface. This was a lie. It had to be. When her turn came, Jasmine stood up slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the weight of all the eyes in the courtroom, but she refused to let them intimidate her. Her gaze locked onto David's, the man she once called her husband, the father of her children. His expression was cold, but somewhere deep in his eyes, she saw something. Regret. Maybe, but it was too little, too late. "I am the mother of Caleb and Chloe," Jasmine said, her voice steady but firm. "I gave birth to them. I carried them for 9 months. I raised them, and I will fight for them until my last breath. I never signed any documents giving up my parental rights. Not now, not ever." The room fell silent. Jasmine could feel every eye on her, but she didn't waver. The evidence she had gathered was her shield. She opened the manila folder slowly, pulling out the stack of papers she had prepared. She handed them to the judge, who glanced at the documents before returning her attention to Jasmine. "I have no idea where these documents came from," Jasmine continued, "but I know for a fact that they were forged. I did not sign them. I never agreed to give up my children. This is a deliberate attempt to steal my rights as their mother, and I won't stand for it." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Do you have any proof to support your claim, Mrs. Brooks?" Jasmine nodded. She had prepared for this. "Yes, Your Honor. I have a forensic handwriting analysis. It shows that the signature on these documents is not mine. Additionally, I have security footage from Mercy General Hospital, where I worked my overnight shifts during the time these documents were allegedly signed. The footage clearly shows that I was not at the attorney's office at that time." The courtroom buzzed with whispers, and Jasmine could see David's face tighten. He knew this wasn't going as planned. But Jasmine wasn't finished. "There's more," she added, her voice gaining strength. "The woman who filed these documents, Miss Simone Carter, used to work in medical records at Mercy General. She had access to my files, my personal information. She had the means and the opportunity to forge these documents, and she did." Simone's eyes widened, and for the first time since the trial began, she looked nervous. Jasmine saw it, saw the cracks in Simone's perfect facade. Simone's lawyer stood, trying to interject, but the judge raised a hand, silencing him. She turned her attention to the woman in the room who had been so quiet, so reserved. And in that moment, Jasmine realized the truth. She wasn't just fighting for her children, she was fighting for herself, for the truth to come out. The judge ordered a brief recess, and Jasmine stepped away from the stand. She could feel the eyes of the room on her, but this time, it didn't matter. She had laid the foundation, and now the truth was out. As she sat back down, her brother Marcus leaned over and whispered, "You've got this, Jazz. We'll finish this fight." Jasmine nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. She had been through so much already, and though the battle wasn't over, this was her moment to claim what was rightfully hers. The courtroom buzzed with the kind of silence that only precedes an inevitable storm. Jasmine sat on the edge of her seat, her eyes fixed on the judge, who had just dismissed the court for a short recess. Marcus sat beside her, his hand gently resting on her shoulder, offering silent support. Outside the room, she could hear the murmur of voices, but her mind was still locked in the chaos of the last few hours. The truth was unraveling, and she could almost feel the weight of the injustice lifting, but the battle was far from over. David and Simone had retreated to a corner of the room, their heads together in hushed conversation. Jasmine watched them, but her gaze didn't linger long. She didn't need to see them to know what they were plotting. They had been working together to destroy her life, and now they were scrambling, trying to salvage what little was left. It was too late. The damage they had done, the lies they had told, couldn't be undone that easily. "You're doing great, Jazz," Marcus whispered, his voice steady. "Just hold strong. We're one step closer." Jasmine nodded, her throat tight with the weight of his words. The forensic handwriting analysis, the security footage, everything was lined up in her favor. But still, there was this nagging feeling in her gut. She couldn't shake the sense that they weren't finished with her yet. No, David and Simone were cornered, but they were still dangerous. They had everything to lose. The doors to the courtroom swung open, and everyone returned to their seats. Jasmine straightened up, her heart pounding. The judge, a stern woman who had kept a calm but watchful eye over the proceedings, returned to her seat and called the court back into session. "Mrs. Brooks, you have presented some compelling evidence," the judge began, her voice measured but firm. "However, we are still in the early stages of this matter. I am ordering an immediate forensic investigation into the documents in question. We will also be reviewing the footage provided. This case will proceed on the basis of these findings." Jasmine's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't over. Not yet. But this was her chance. This was the opening she needed to drive the final nail into the coffin of their lies. David and Simone exchanged uneasy glances, and Jasmine could see the tension in their body language. They were losing control, and they knew it. The truth was slipping away from them, and they couldn't stop it. But she couldn't afford to let her guard down just yet. The judge stood, signaling the brief recess before the next phase of the trial. Jasmine stood as well, her mind racing. Marcus was already speaking with her lawyer, a woman named Carol, who had been with her through the toughest parts of this case. Carol was a sharp, seasoned attorney, and Jasmine trusted her completely. "Everything's looking good, Jazz," Carol said, her voice calm but firm. "But we need to stay focused. There's still a lot at stake here." Jasmine nodded, her jaw tightening. "I know. I just can't believe how far they've gone. Simone, David, it's like they planned this all along." Carol gave her a reassuring smile. "They've underestimated you. And now it's time for them to learn what happens when you mess with a mother's love for her children. We'll get them, Jazz. I promise." The break was short, and soon the court was back in session. The judge was already sitting, flipping through the paperwork with her eyes narrowed in concentration. Jasmine stood tall, her posture stiff but resolute. She wasn't just fighting for her children anymore. She was fighting for every woman who had been silenced, for every person who had been wronged by someone they trusted. "Let's proceed," the judge said, her voice cutting through the heavy silence in the room. "Mr. Brooks, do you have anything further to add?" David stood up slowly, his eyes locked on the judge, but there was something different in his demeanor now. He looked nervous. The confidence he had carried into the courtroom was starting to crack. "I have nothing further, Your Honor," David said, his voice shaky, almost reluctant. Simone, too, looked uneasy. For the first time since the trial began, the mask she had been wearing slipped just enough for Jasmine to see the fear behind it. The perfect businesswoman, the woman who had played the role of the caring stepmother, was unraveling, and Jasmine could see it. "Mrs. Brooks," the judge called, her eyes now focused on Jasmine. "Your motion for a forensic investigation has been granted. We will reconvene after the investigation results are presented. I expect both parties to cooperate fully with the investigators. This matter is far from resolved." Jasmine's heart thudded in her chest. It wasn't the immediate victory she had hoped for, but it was progress. Real progress. It was a win in her column, and she could feel the tide turning. But as the courtroom began to empty out, the adrenaline of the moment wore off, and the familiar weight of her reality sank back in. She was closer than ever to getting her children back, but she knew that David and Simone weren't done with her. They still had tricks up their sleeves, and they would fight dirty. As she walked out of the courtroom, Marcus by her side, her mind swirled with thoughts of what was next. What other lies would they try to spin? What would they do when they realized that the truth was catching up to them? "One step at a time," Marcus said, as though reading her thoughts. "You've got this, Jazz. We'll see this through." Jasmine nodded, her heart steady despite the uncertainty. She was a fighter, and no matter how many times they tried to knock her down, she would rise. The battle wasn't over yet, but she could feel the power shifting in her favor. Simone and David may have started this war, but it would be Jasmine who finished it. The following weeks felt like a blur. Jasmine moved through her days on autopilot. Work at the clinic, meetings with her lawyer Carol, and endless hours of paperwork, all while keeping up the facade of normalcy for Caleb and Chloe. The twins were thriving, their smiles brighter than ever when they were with her, but each goodbye during their supervised visits chipped away at her soul. Their cries, the way they clung to her as if they thought she might disappear again, haunted her at night. Each day, the pressure mounted. David and Simone were still playing their game, quietly spreading lies, trying to turn people against her, while her world seemed to be crumbling. But Jasmine held on to the one thing they couldn't take away from her, the truth. And the truth was coming to light, piece by piece. She spent long hours reviewing the documents Carol had sent over, papers detailing the forged signatures, the timeline discrepancies, and the security footage that proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that she was nowhere near the office when the custody documents were allegedly signed. There was no way David and Simone could escape this. But even with all the evidence on her side, Jasmine couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. The investigation was moving slowly, but she needed to speed things up. The clock was ticking, and with every passing day, she felt further away from the life she once had, the family she once had. The pain of seeing David and Simone act as if they were entitled to everything that belonged to her stung deeper than anything else. It was late one evening when Marcus called. His voice was clipped, urgent. "Jazz, you need to come down to the office. Now," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. She was sitting in her small apartment, the twins' toys scattered around her like remnants of a life she couldn't seem to hold on to. She picked up her keys, the familiar weight of them in her palm offering some comfort, and rushed out the door. Marcus's office was in the heart of downtown, a small, unassuming building that nonetheless housed some of the most powerful legal minds in the city. When she entered, Marcus was already waiting for her, standing by the window with his back to her. He didn't turn when she approached, his eyes fixed on something outside. "What's going on?" Jasmine asked, her voice steady but laced with concern. He turned around slowly, his expression more serious than she'd ever seen it. "We have a problem. The investigator we hired, he's gone missing." Jasmine's stomach dropped. "What do you mean, missing? Did they get to him?" Marcus nodded, his jaw tight. "Exactly. I can't prove it, but the timing's too perfect. We were close, Jazz. Real close." He was about to report his findings about the forged documents, the chain of custody, and Simone's role in all of it. And now, he's disappeared. No one knows where he is. Jasmine's mind raced. She'd known things were getting dangerous, but this was different. Someone was actively working against her, someone powerful enough to make things disappear. And that someone wasn't going to stop until they got what they wanted. "How do we fight this?" she whispered, the words heavy in the air. Marcus walked over to the desk and placed a folder in front of her. "We take matters into our own hands. I've got people in the right places. We'll find out who's behind this. And when we do, we'll make sure they regret it." Jasmine didn't hesitate. This was her life on the line, her children, and no one, not David, not Simone, was going to take them from her. "I'm in," she said, her voice a low, fierce promise. "We'll do whatever it takes." The following days were a blur of covert meetings, hidden files, and late-night strategy sessions. Marcus had used his connections to dig deeper, contacting sources within the legal system and even the police. Jasmine stayed out of the way, using her time to focus on the twins and keep them safe, all the while stewing in the knowledge that her husband and his mistress were plotting their next move. Then, one evening, she received a call. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, but the words were clear. "We know what they've been hiding." Jasmine's heart skipped a beat as the mystery caller gave her the location of a warehouse on the outskirts of town. It was all she needed. With Marcus by her side, they rushed to the address, the weight of the moment settling in as they approached the warehouse. When they entered, the sight before them was anything but what they expected. The room was dimly lit, but the boxes stacked around the warehouse didn't contain files or legal documents. They were filled with something else entirely. The stacks were filled with equipment, computers, and recordings. This wasn't just about custody anymore. It was something much bigger. "This is it," Marcus said, his voice tight with realization. "They've been running operations, fraud, identity theft. And the investigation wasn't about just you, Jazz. It was about covering up everything else." Jasmine stood frozen, the magnitude of what she was seeing sinking in. She was up against something far more insidious than she had ever imagined. This wasn't just about her marriage or her children anymore. This was about criminal operations, about people who were willing to do anything to keep their secrets safe. "This isn't just for the kids," she said softly, a dark clarity settling in. "This is about bringing them down." Back at the courthouse, the tension was unbearable. The investigation had stalled, but now, armed with this new information, Jasmine felt a glimmer of hope. She could feel the pieces coming together, each part of the puzzle falling into place. The courtroom was packed once again, and as the judge entered, Jasmine's resolve only grew stronger. The evidence was irrefutable. The lies, the deception, it would all be exposed. As David and Simone sat across the room, their once confident posture now trembling, Jasmine took a deep breath. She had fought this battle not just for her children, but for herself. And now, she was going to finish it. The morning of the final hearing arrived with an eerie calm, a quiet before the storm. Jasmine hadn't slept much, her mind racing with everything that had led to this moment. The evidence was in her favor, but she knew better than anyone that the wheels of justice turned slowly, and there were forces out there willing to do whatever it took to delay or manipulate the truth. But today, she was determined to make them see the reality. The courthouse loomed in front of her, its cold stone walls an unwelcome reminder of the battle she had fought and was still fighting. As she walked through the security checks and down the long hallway, her pulse quickened. She could already hear the murmur of voices inside the courtroom. Today would decide everything. Jasmine stepped into the room, and all eyes turned to her. She didn't flinch. Instead, she squared her shoulders and walked toward the bench. Marcus, her rock, sat behind her, his expression unreadable, but she knew he was just as determined as she was. He'd seen this from the very beginning. How her strength had driven her, how her love for her children had fueled the fight. David and Simone were already seated at the other side of the room, their faces tight with apprehension. For the first time since the trial had begun, Jasmine saw a crack in David's facade. The man who had once stood tall, arrogantly believing he could control everything, now seemed smaller, a man desperate to keep his empire intact. Simone sat beside him, her perfect composure now slipping, her eyes darting nervously from the judge to Jasmine. It was clear, both of them knew the end was near. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. She was a stern woman, her reputation for fairness well known. The case had dragged on for weeks, and it was clear that she was ready to bring this matter to a close. "Mr. Brooks, Mrs. Brooks," the judge began, her voice calm but firm. "We've heard all the arguments, reviewed the evidence, and now it is time to make a decision. Mrs. Brooks, you've made a compelling case. The forensic evidence, the security footage, and the testimony provided have shown that the documents in question were indeed forged. It is clear to this court that the signature was not yours, and that your parental rights were unlawfully surrendered." Jasmine felt a weight lift off her chest as the judge's words hit the air, but she wasn't done yet. The battle had been long and grueling, but it wasn't over until her children were truly safe. The judge continued, her gaze moving from Jasmine to David and then to Simone. "Mr. Brooks, Miss Carter, I will be issuing a ruling on the custody of Caleb and Chloe Brooks. The evidence presented today demonstrates a clear violation of Mrs. Brooks' rights as a mother. Your actions have caused immeasurable harm, and it is clear that Mrs. Brooks is the more fit and capable parent." David stood suddenly, his face pale, a wave of panic washing over him. "Your Honor, he began, but the judge cut him off with a sharp motion of her hand. "Mr. Brooks, I have made my ruling," she said, her tone final. I'm ordering an immediate reversal of the custody documents and granting Mrs. Brooks full custody of Caleb and Chloe Brooks. You will be given supervised visitation rights until further notice. As for Miss Simone Carter, I am referring this matter for further investigation into the forgery and conspiracy to commit kidnapping. This court will not tolerate such actions. The room was still. Jasmine could feel her heart racing, but this time it was with relief, not fear. The truth had won. Her children were coming home. David's face twisted with disbelief, his mouth opening and closing as though he were trying to find the words, but nothing came out. He shot a glance at Simone, who was staring at the judge in stunned silence. It was over. They had lost. I will also be referring this case to the appropriate authorities for further legal action against all parties involved, the judge added. This matter is concluded for today. Mrs. Brooks, the court has ruled in your favor. Jasmine's legs felt like they were made of jelly, but she forced herself to stay upright. She had won. She had finally won. The judge's gavel struck down, and Jasmine could feel the tension in the room crack, the weight lifting off her shoulders. It wasn't just about the custody of her children anymore. It was about taking back her life, her dignity, and her power. The lies, the betrayal, it was all over now. As the courtroom began to empty, Marcus walked up to Jasmine, his hand resting on her shoulder. You did it, Jazz. I'm proud of you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Jasmine smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek. We did it, Marcus. We did it. Outside, the cold air of the early evening felt refreshing against her skin as they walked to the parking lot. The city was alive around them, but for Jasmine, everything felt different now. She had fought, and she had won. The truth had come out, and she had her children back. But it wasn't just the victory that mattered, it was the journey. The strength she had found in herself, the love she had for her children, and the family she had fought to protect. As she climbed into the car, she glanced back at Marcus, her mind already turning toward the next step. I've got a lot of work ahead of me, she said, her voice firm. But I'm ready. We're ready. Marcus smiled, his eyes warm. I know you are, sis. The journey had been long, and it wasn't over yet. But with her children back in her arms and the strength of her family behind her, Jasmine knew there was nothing she couldn't face. The future was hers to shape, and she would do it on her terms.